Hey, friends. How are you tonight? Well, if you're seeing my face, you know what night it must be. It's True Crime Wednesday, and I'm your host, Lori Hellis. We have quite a few things to talk about. A lot has happened in the last week or so, which is kind of interesting. I think we were all expecting that we were going to be um, wrapped up in Koberger and Stephen Stearns for the whole summer, and those didn't happen. Adelson, I think, finished a little sooner than people expected. And so we've been kind of looking for cases to talk about, but we actually have a few. One case I want to talk about tonight is Kelsey Fitz Simmons. Now, this case is getting a lot of coverage recently because Massachusetts is at it again. Yep, that's right. Kelsey Fitzsimmons, my husband was replaying my last week's video, and I realized how often I say and I'm going to try not to do that quite as often. And I'm going to try to be a little bit more aware of that. So Kelsey Fitzsimmons is a Massachusetts police officer. She is from North Andover Police Department. She's 28 years old and is a new mom. She was originally on maternity leave. During her pregnancy, she had some mental health issues. That's not always all that uncommon, and sometimes they resolve once the baby's born. But the mental health issues continued, and she ended up with some pretty severe postpartum depression. So initially, she was on maternity leave. She also had been receiving mental health treatment for severe postpartum depression. So in June of this year, on June 30th, she and her fiance, who was the father of their 4-month-old baby, were on a vacation. They actually were on their bachelor and bachelorette party. The wedding was scheduled for October. After that incident where everyone was drinking quite a bit, the boyfriend reported that they got in a fight while they were on this trip. He claims that she hit him several times with her fist and that he was afraid for his life. Now, he's a firefighter, she's a police officer. That he was afraid for his life and went and stayed in a hotel. The next day, he went and asked for a domestic violence restraining order, which was granted. The restraining order also gave him temporary full custody of the 4-month-old baby. So 3 police officers who were work colleagues of Kelsey Fitzsimmons showed up at her house to serve this domestic violence order. They also showed up to take the baby. And when they got to the house, she retreated into her bedroom, or maybe was in her bedroom at the time. They came to serve the document, and there are varying claims of what happened next. She claims that she was distraught because they were going to take the baby and pointed her service revolver at her own head. She was intending to unalive herself. And the next thing that happened was one of these officers pulled his gun, and shot her in the chest. She was life flighted to the hospital, where she was in the hospital for 58 days. She had severe damage to her chest, her liver, her ribs. She had a collapsed lung. So the 20-year veteran officer has not been disciplined in any way. She has now had 6 surgeries and had to be in the hospital for 58 days. She was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. The grand jury refused to indict her on attempted murder charges. After her grand jury indictment, she was in custody. She was released with conditions, and some of the conditions were that she was to have an ankle monitor and that she was to have some sort of an alcohol monitor. Now, alcohol monitors vary from jurisdiction and different companies have different kinds of alcohol monitors. So there's something called a scram monitor, and this may very well be what she was required to use because the alleged incident having to do with the domestic violence involved alcohol. So it may very well be that she was required to have a scram unit. A scram unit is a unit that you wear, is usually around your ankle, and it comes in contact with your skin and it measures the perspiration in your skin for alcohol. It is an alternative alcohol monitor to having to blow into, say, an automobile interlock system or something like that. Well, there were a couple of problems uh, with the court's conditions for her release. First was that she was scheduled to have a 7th surgery on her liver, and the physician said, "We cannot perform the surgery if she's wearing an ankle monitor." So she went to the court and asked for permission not to wear the ankle monitor until after her surgery was done. Now let's remember, Karen Reed, also in Massachusetts, although not in the same community, Karen Reed posted bond and was released. She did not have to wear an ankle monitor, and she was accused of murder. So it's kind of weird that at this point, this woman was being required to wear an ankle monitor for a less significant charge, particularly understanding her physical limitations. So the judge ordered that she use an alcohol monitor that required her 3 times a day to blow into it. Now, any of those breathalyzers require a lot of air. You have to blow for quite a long time and pretty forcefully into those machines, whether it's a breathalyzer or whether it's this alcohol monitor. And that was a problem for her because she was still recovering from having this horrible traumatic chest injury, including broken ribs. So she was having difficulty and a collapsed lung. So she was having difficulty breathing and it was very painful for her. So her attorney went back to court and asked the judge if there was some other form of monitoring that she could do. Now, the important thing to understand is that she was in compliance with those requirements. She was doing it even though it was very painful. The parole and probation person who helped her with this alcohol monitor said he saw that she was in a tremendous amount of pain when she was trying to activate this machine. So there was no question she had letters from her doctor that explained why she was having so much difficulty doing that. And when she went back to court asking for relief from this because of her physical condition, the judge instead revoked her release and put her back in jail. Um, and the judge was, if you think Judge Cannoni was difficult. This judge was insulting and belittling and very, very hostile to the defense. And I don't know, Tim Bradle, who is a well-known attorney who also represents Turtle Boy, is representing Kelsey Fitz Simmons, and I kind of wondered if maybe there's a problem with Tim Bradle. The judge has a problem with him. I don't know, but it seems to me unnecessary to have this woman in jail. She's not getting the proper medical attention that she needs. She's probably not, she's certainly not able to do the liver surgery that she had planned. And she is unable to see her baby. She now cannot see her child at all, even under supervision. So interestingly enough, there have been no charges filed against the 20-year veteran who fired on her, claiming that she pulled a gun first. She claims she pulled the gun and pointed it at her own head. And there's been no charges filed against him. And coincidentally, there's no body cameras, although the community allotted money in 2021 to buy body cameras for law enforcement. They've never been purchased and they're not used. So that's one we're going to keep an eye on, because it seems that Massachusetts is where justice goes to die. And it's interesting that there are a lot of people. I am so sorry. There are a lot of people who are, now that Karen Reed's case is over, are taking up the battle cry for Kelsey Fitz Simmons and are planning. There is a hearing, a status hearing coming up. I think it's next week. And there are a lot of people who are planning to turn out for Kelsey Fitz Simmons the way they turned out for Karen Reed. So we're going to keep an eye on that one. It could be very interesting. I did want to give you a little bit of an update on Tiffany Adams. This is the grandma who headed up 5 people who met her son's baby mama out in the middle of nowhere with a court-authorized supervisor and murdered them both. It is another toxic grandma case, and interesting that we just seem to be seeing more and more of those, whether it's Piketon, whether it's Donna Adelson, whether it's Matthew Restelli, which we're going to talk about next, or whether it's Tiffany Adams. So we're seeing more and more of these. So we're going to keep an eye on it. Right now, she is scheduled to be arraigned in November. Now, it's very odd to me, and I have yet to delve into the way this actually works in Oklahoma, because it's very strange to me that they had a preliminary hearing months ago, and at that preliminary hearing, 2 of the co-defendants testified against the rest of them. Now, the others are still intending to go on to trial, but it's odd to me that we're not having an arraignment until November, and I don't understand how Oklahoma law works. So if anybody out there can enlighten me, let me know, because it seems very strange to me that we had preliminary hearings months ago. Preliminary hearings usually would result in an indictment, and those preliminary hearings were held months ago. It's very strange to me that she is still not been indicted. One of the reasons we're having a lot of trouble getting information about the case is because the judge entered a gag order in May. And so none of the participants are really allowed to talk about the case. And the only thing we're getting are updates that are publicly available on the court's docket. So, and news organizations aren't getting anything else either. So, don't really know quite what's going on, but we know that we're going to find something out in November. Now, in the Restelli case, this is another toxic grandma. So, this is the case of the death of Matthew Restelli. This is a Utah case. And Catherine Restelli was married to Matthew Restelli. Her mother, uh, Tracy Grist, and her brother, Kevin Ellis, were involved. Catherine Restelli was separated from Matthew. They were living in different states. She had gone home to live with her mother in Utah, and they came up with a plan to lure Matthew. He thought she was calling to tell him they were going to reconcile and for him to come and get her and their children. And instead, they lured him into a trap where it is alleged that Kevin Ellis killed him. Catherine Restelli has cooperated. She's pled guilty. She's been sentenced to 1 to 5 years or 1 to 15 years for luring her husband in so they could kill him. She's not allowed to have any contact with her children. She admitted to conspiring with her mother and brother to lure Matthew there. And she is currently serving a sentence. She's cooperating with the prosecution, and the mother and brother are set for trial in January of next year. So January 12th and then January 20th. So one after another. So that's another toxic grandma case we're going to keep an eye on, because grandma actually searched online for the Adelson case, wanting to know how they got away with it or didn't. So we'll be keeping an eye on that case as well. I did have a question. Several weeks ago, we talked about Ralph Menzies. This is also a Utah case. He has been on Utah's death row since 1988 when he was sentenced to the death penalty. His execution after years and years of appeals, his execution was ordered, and the governor refused to stay the execution. They went to the trial court level as well as the parole board asking for his trial to be, or his execution to be stayed, and for his sentence to be commuted. The reason they asked for that is because they believe that he has dementia, and that the dementia is so bad that he cannot understand why it is that they're going to execute him. So the defense then, somebody asked me about the status of it because we talked about it. So he was scheduled for execution on the 5th of September. However, it went to the Utah Supreme Court. So he's been denied at all the lower levels. Well, it went to the Utah Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed that he needed an additional evaluation to determine whether or not he's competent. Now, the district court judge said that the judge believed that Menzies was competent and understood, but his defense team says that he has very rapidly become incompetent and would not understand why it is that they were executing him. He was scheduled to be the first one to be executed by firing squad under the new or the it's under the change to the law that resurrected the firing squad. So he was scheduled to be the first one to have that sentence carried out by firing squad, and now that's been delayed. He is quite elderly at this point, and the Utah Supreme Court said before they made a ruling, they wanted to know what they wanted a new evaluation of his competency. So, and still in Utah, I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions about why there are so many cases from Utah and Florida. But still in Utah is the case of Jennifer Gledhill. The victim is Matthew Gledhill. The husband was a member of the Utah National Guard. He disappeared, and it is a nobody case. The wife confessed to her lover, that's Jennifer Gledhill, confessed to her lover that she killed Matthew and buried his body. The boyfriend gave copies of screenshots of all her texts and audio of phone calls to the police. But she is still, as far as I know, awaiting trial. And I didn't look it up to find out what the status is yet on her case. I guess I didn't write down the date. So maybe we can look it up together right now. Jennifer Gledhill. By the way, while I am doing this, I wanted to let you know that I saw an alert from Gigi that said her Grammy was back in the hospital. Now, for those of you who know, Gigi is very close to her grandmother, who's about the same age as my mom, in her early 90s. And so for those of you who want to send her good thoughts and prayers, that would be, I'm sure, very welcome for her, because trial date, because I know it's very concerning. Let me see, December trial, December 8th through the 17th. So that one will be coming up, and I'm writing that down. So that one is one we'll keep an eye on to see whether or not it actually goes to trial, because y'all know sometimes those trial dates are a moving target. And just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, just when you thought we were finally done with Donna Adelson, she wants a new trial. And she wants to question some of the jurors. She wants a new trial because she's alleging jury misconduct. She is alleging that the jury foreman, now we've heard from the jury foreman, we've heard from several of the jurors from Donna's case. We didn't hear from jurors on Charlie's case, but we have heard from these folks. We heard from juror number 5, who said he was inspired to change his career plans and plans to apply for law school as a result of his jury service. And we heard from the woman who was the foreman. The young woman who was the foreman is very active on TikTok. Up until this time, until the time that she was finished with her jury service, she was most interested in information having to do with things for moms. And but according to Donna's pleadings, she did say on one of her TikToks that she posted that she was a juror. Now, there's no indication that she said what case she was in, what county, where, I mean, we don't have any indication that she identified that she was a juror in Florida on Donna Adelson's case. As far as anyone knows, all she said was that she was a juror. She later deleted that TikTok post, which never looks great. But as far as anyone knows, she was not searching or looking at information about the case, was not posting about the case, and that there was no communication about the case during the trial. We saw this come up in Vallow, where one of the guys said, "Wow, just Google this case," and it turned out that this juror, as he was leaving the courtroom after the jury was leaving the courtroom after they had rendered their verdict on Vallow, and somebody in the hallway said, "Wow, you're going to want to Google this case to see what you didn't hear." And he did. And as a result, he was boggled that Lori Vallow was responsible for 3 deaths in Idaho. And so they asked for a new trial and claimed juror misconduct. And this is a similar case here. I don't think it goes anywhere. I don't think it goes anywhere for any of the jurors. I don't think the court is going to allow Lori to question the jurors or allow her appellate attorneys to interview jurors. It doesn't appear that there was any juror misconduct. The court was very clear about the fact that they could not communicate about the case. There is no provision within the cautions and the rules that juries get that said you can't ever be on social media, you can't post a TikTok, you can't do any of those things. And I certainly don't think it's enough to overturn her verdict just because this juror happened to say on social media that she had been called as a juror without identifying what case, where she was, any of those things. So I don't think Donna's getting a new trial based on that, but we'll see. The next case I wanted to talk about is Brooks Houck. He was sentenced, I think it was today, to life plus 5 years. Now, he was not sentenced to life without parole, which means that at some point there will be a possibility that he can get parole. I wanted to say one other thing about Adelson. A lot of people reached out to me and asked me about this because there has been this rumor, and I want to say this is unconfirmed. I don't really know where it came from. So, and I don't usually like to give credence to rumors, but it does raise kind of an interesting legal question. So I wanted to answer it. There is a rumor out there that Wendy, in whatever state she's in, which we actually don't know, we don't know. The last anyone heard, she was living in Austin, Texas, but then there were rumors swirling around that she was in Colorado. Nobody really knows for sure exactly where she is, except everyone's pretty sure she's not in Florida. Wendy, there is this rumor going around that Wendy has a serious boyfriend, live-in boyfriend, and that she wanted that boyfriend to adopt her children to keep them out of the from being awarded custody, being awarded to Danny Markel's family should she be arrested. I don't know if there is any truth to this rumor, but it did raise a legal question. Can a parent allow a non-spouse to adopt their children? So for the most part, now I did look at Texas law, but I didn't look at Colorado law. under Texas law, in order for a partner, a step parent, to adopt their partner's children, they have to be married. Now, that isn't really an impediment if Wendy decides that she wants to get married. But all the information we have right now is that this person is a boyfriend and not a husband. It is possible that if she it is possible that if she is married to this person, that they could adopt her children. In most states, the 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 parent who currently has custody and is having their spouse adopt the child, when that petition is filed, they are required to give grandparents notice and the opportunity to object. So I don't think that Wendy, first of all, I don't believe that she can have a boyfriend adopt her children. She would have to marry this guy. Second, I don't believe that it would completely foreclose the Markells from stepping in and objecting to that adoption under these circumstances, particularly if Wendy gets arrested. So, and we don't really know what's going to happen with Wendy. We don't really know whether the prosecution feels that they have enough to go after her. So we're still playing that waiting game. And a little bit of where's Wendy? And as Kathy from Gossip, Rumor, and Innuendo would say, this does not mean to go out and stalk Wendy. So please don't. We also got some really interesting things that turned up in some letters from death row. It seems that Chad Daybell has decided to start writing letters from death row. Well, first of all, if he's as bad at writing letters as he was at writing books, nobody wants to read these letters. Trust me. I read Chad's books. I took one for the team and read Chad's books, so y'all didn't have to, and it was painful. So if you are wondering whether or not these letters are going to be works of art, I guarantee you they're not. I did read through a couple of them. So what has happened is that Emma Daybell Murray, who is Chad's eldest daughter, has started her own Twitter account. I just am never going to call it X. Has started her own Twitter account where she has decided to share his story because he wants his supporters to receive information uncensored and unfiltered directly from him. He's recently been allowed some in-person visits with his family, and one of the letters was devoted to Tammy, telling the story of how they met and how much he loves her and how they're going to be together in heaven. And my question was, who is he trying to fool? Is he still trying to fool Emma? Because she seems to be the one who is continuing to support him. Now, we've heard that there's been something of a schism within the 5 Daybell children, and that not all of them are supporting their dad. But Emma has never wavered. She has always been firmly in Chad Daybell's corner. She believes he is innocent, and she is going to be there until the bitter end. And now she has decided to give Chad Daybell a forum where he can share his thoughts and his feelings and his uncensored and unfiltered story. No, thank you. I read bits and pieces of a couple of them, and I'm passing. I've read enough nonsense from Chad Daybell. So, and I would encourage people not to go follow that that site because I don't think that we need to give him any more airtime than he's already gotten. So, and then the last case I wanted to talk about tonight is Shana Gardner. Those of you who remember, once again in Florida, this was the murder of Jared Bridegan. He was, and Shana Gardner is the daughter of the people of a very wealthy family who had Stampin' On, I think was their business, was like art stamps or something. And that family was in Utah, but they are now in Washington, I believe. Shana Gardner's parents have Shana and Jared's children, and Jared's second wife has the children he had with her. So recently, the defense asked for some information to be withheld from the public as they're preparing for trial. And the stuff that they wanted withheld included tattoo photos and communications from jail that she claims are personal and private. The judge agreed to hold off on releasing any of that information until the jury begins deliberation. The alleged gunman in that case has recanted his admissions. He initially entered a plea and was cooperating with the state, and then several months ago stood up in court and recanted those admissions and asked for a new attorney. So no one really knows what impact that's going to have on the trial. Right now, the trial is scheduled for August of 2026, so a year out. So we talked a bit last week about a case that I'm very interested in. It's the Portland Five. It's a serial killer who killed 5 women in Portland, Oregon. It is kind of in my backyard. I used to live in Portland. Now I live in Central Oregon, in the area Bend, but used to live in Portland for years. And so I am very interested in that case. I'm also interested and inspired by Melissa Smith, who is the mother of one of the murdered girls, and her determination to get an answer about what was happening with her daughter. So I'm going to be continuing to do some research and cover that. That's all I have to cover tonight. So what would you all like to talk about? While Jen is looking for some questions, I will just please remind everybody, please like and subscribe. And please share this out. Share it with your friends. And let people know that we're out here on Wednesday night talking about true crime, talking about it from a legal perspective. And you all know I'm working on a new project. For a lot of reasons, I've been hesitant to really make that public, and I'm not quite ready yet. What I will tell you is the way the process works is when you write nonfiction, you write a book proposal, which is a pretty lengthy document, usually around 70 pages or so, where you outline what the book is going to cover, what you hope to do with it, and a whole lot of other things go into it. So I am right at the end of finishing the final edits on the book proposal and getting ready to send it off to my agent. And then what happens is the agent goes out to publishers looking for someone who's interested in the book that I am proposing. And once we know what is going on with the book, I will let everybody know what the new project is going to be. But I think you should look for some changes and some additions to what I'm going to be doing. So hang on to your hat. We're going to have some new stuff on the horizon and some stuff I'm really excited about. So, what kind of questions have you got for me? Hi, Rachel Gamber. What are your thoughts on families of alleged killers getting custody of children? It seems to keep happening and it really bothers me. Yeah, I can see that it would be concerning. So, what family law courts, often they're part of the probate section within the court departments, what family law courts are required to do is to apply a set of conditions, questions, that all sort of boil down to asking what is in the child or the children's best interest. So I understand that it's a little bit frustrating to see the family of an alleged killer get the children. In the case of Shana Gardner, she left after Jared Bridegan was murdered. She left Florida and went to Washington and was living in Washington with her children with her parents. So the children were already in the grandparents' household. When she was arrested in Washington and brought back to Florida, the children remained. In that case, the children have neither parent, and social services, child welfare gets involved. And so they placed the children with the grandparents because that's where they'd been living. And courts often give preference to the child's current living situation, as long as you can prove that it's a safe, healthy place where they are accustomed to being, because it's less disruption for kids. Now, I know that doesn't sit well with folks like Wendy Adelson and like Shana Gardner, because it seems really unfair that the family of the alleged murderer or the defendant sort of gets a leg up on getting custody, and that certainly is what happened with Shana Gardner. The stepmother was the one who attempted to get custody of them because her children had a relationship with the older Bridegan kids. And it is always very difficult for step parents to get custody. Um, there are very clear-cut laws that require certain showings. And even after you make those showings, you still have to prove that it's in the children's best interest for them to be placed with the step parent. So I don't, I wasn't really surprised at the way that the Bridegan case came out, because that sort of uh, runs in concert with family law. That sort of goes along the lines of what I would have expected in a family law case, where the children had been living with these grandparents for an extended period of time after Shana Gardner was arrested. So, because the courts are going to look at where do the children have the most connections? Where is it most familiar to them? Where did they go to school? Where do they have therapy? Where do they have medical treatment? All of those things. And those were all things that had been established in Washington with the grandparents. So, yeah, but I can see how it can seem sort of frustrating that um, in the case of Wendy Adelson, she's part of the murdering family, and we can say that now because they've all been convicted. She's part of the murdering family, and yet she gets to withhold the children from the Markel family, from their father's family. And I see that that's frustrating. I know that the Markells have been instrumental in some changes to Florida law in order to allow grandparents to have more access, but that really only applies if Wendy gets arrested and if the children are in Florida, which is one of the reasons I think Wendy took them out of Florida. So I don't know why she's got such a hard attitude about the Markell family. But it's sad. It's sad for the boys because let's face it, they need all the people in their lives they can get. So, what else you got for me? Mm, Jane Blackbird. Is Officer Fitzsimmons on unaliving watch and trial? She is absolutely, absolutely uh, being watched carefully. Yeah. Jane, how did you like Crater Lake? Yes, there has been a huge butterfly hatch this year, and it has been delightful to get up into the high lakes and see all of these. They're little orange butterflies, and they look like a small monarch butterfly, and they're everywhere, anywhere that there's water around and flowers. So, what other questions y'all have? Oh, hi, Jackie. What's up with Karen Reed? I read that someone wanted her emails, or maybe it was her phone. Okay. So, y'all know that there is all of this ongoing drama with Turtle Boy. Aiden Carney is his name. He's a podcaster, and he is from the Canton area from the very beginning. He believed that Karen Reed was innocent, and he has been fighting the fight, beating the drum about corruption in that area for years. So during all the time, there were demonstrations and people protesting on behalf of Karen Reed, and he was approaching. Turtle Boy is he's a little rough around the edges. He's kind of a shock jock, okay? And so he was going up to these people, witnesses in the case, and he was trying to talk to them for his podcast. He wanted them to answer questions. Well, of course, the questions were very confrontational. They were about uh, Karen Reed is innocent, and the belief that the police department has been at worst corrupt and at best negligent in how they prosecuted her case. And as a result, he didn't make any friends in the Canton Police Department, and he ended up getting arrested for accused of witness tampering. Now, at one point, because Karen Reed had had some contact with Aiden Carney, he they were accusing her of witness tampering as well. So they submitted it to the grand jury, and the grand jury refused to indict Karen Reed on the witness tampering charges. Now, during that time, they seized her phones. These were not the same phones that she had when John O'Keefe died. They were replacement phones. Well, they seized her phones, and her lawyers said, you cannot just potluck. You can't just completely download and use that information off her phones, because it's very likely there's attorney-client privileged information on those phones. Now, yes, her trial is over, but the attorney-client confidentiality, the privilege, doesn't end when the trial ends, when the case ends. It goes on forever. So they said, you can't have those phones, you have to submit them to a special master called a taint team, because you don't want the evidence tainted by attorney-client information that you are not allowed to have. And so it was supposed to be submitted to a special master to be reviewed to decide whether or not there was anything in there that it would apply to this alleged witness tampering. And it was never done. So now Aiden Carney is getting ready to go to trial, and suddenly the prosecution wants all of Karen Reed's phones, and they seem to be intent on re-indicting her on witness tampering charges. I'm not sure it goes anywhere where they can re-indict her, but they can get those phones. What they can't do is they can't use any information in the phones that was protected by attorney-client privilege. And to the to the best anybody can figure, the phones have never been. It seems like they were extracted, but they weren't ever analyzed. And so what happened was Karen Reed filed a motion to get her car and her phones back. And before she could get the phones back, the state came back and said, "Oh, no, no, you can't take the phones. We want it. We want all that information." So that's where we're at. The court hasn't ruled on whether or not they can do the extraction. There was an order more than a year ago allowing the state to turn over all of the data to a third party for review. It was never done. So now they're asking for it to be done. And Karen Reed's saying, "You had all that time and I want my phones back." So I don't know. We'll see what happens. Massachusetts, I think, has got far bigger fish to fry, but we'll see. We still don't know whether Michael Proctor is going to get reinstated. I think it's very unlikely. But there's a lot of cases right now that are kind of hanging fire because of the evidentiary issues having to do with Michael Proctor. So there are several cases, the King case, the Brian Walsh case, where there are questions about Michael Proctor being the lead prosecutor or the lead investigator in the cases, and what kind of untoward things he may have done in those cases as well. And they certainly want all of those text messages about Karen Reed to bring into court and to impeach his credibility by saying, "Isn't this true? You're just a bad person. And we can't believe anything you say." So we're waiting to see what's going to happen on that. But in the meantime, the judge hasn't made a decision yet on whether or not they can get the Karen Reed, the phone data off Karen Reed's phone during that time that Aiden Carney was arrested. So good question. Mac. Hi, Mac. To be considered as placement for the Markel children, do the Markels need to leave Canada for the States? No. There are interstate and international compacts that would allow them. What would happen is the state where the children would ask the state in Canada to provide them with an application for probably guardianship over the children, and a home study of some kind, background checks. They would do all of the usual paperwork that would be done in a guardianship situation in Canada. And there's an international compact that would allow them to do that. So Florida or whatever state the boys are in would say to Canada, we need you to do all of this work, and we need you to assure that you're going to oversee the placement of these boys in your country. And then Canada would say, yes, under this compact, we agree that we would take the case, oversee the placement, and make sure that that placement is appropriate, safe, which of course it is. So I do not believe the Markells will have to leave Canada, but I think that they would. So Betsy's tag. Are the children old enough to decide for themselves? What about emancipation? These are good questions. So in most states, this is a little bit of a misconception when it comes to family law and when children can decide. In most states, children can't decide until they're 18. Also, in most states, courts will take into consideration an older child, say teenagers, desires, because we know they vote with their feet. But it, in my home state and in a lot of US states, it's a misconception that there is an age at which children can decide for themselves. There is not. Emancipation is a different kettle of fish. If the children were emancipated, typically what happens, emancipation is usually for kids who are a little older than the Markel children, because you have to be able to go to the court as the person who wants to be emancipated and say to a judge, I am able to take care of myself without help from my family, without help from the state. I can get a job, I can work, I can support myself. And that's a tall order for somebody who is under 18. So it's definitely more likely, emancipation is definitely more likely in the 16 to 17 range. It seems to me the Markel boys are in the 13 to 14 age bracket, 12, 13, 13, 14, right in there. So I think they're a little young for emancipation, because you really do have to be able to go to the court and say, I am fully able to assume the responsibilities of an adult, and to do it without help, to do it without state support, without welfare, without any of those things. So I doubt emancipation would be an option. And I don't believe that there would be a point at which the kids could decide for themselves. But those are good questions. What else do you have for me? Sharon Hutchinson, have you been quilting lately? I have been quilting lately, and hopefully by next week I'll be able to show you. So, just between us, I'm glad you were able to go to the Stitch and Post and the Quilt Basket. Love both those places. Love Jean Wells and Valerie Wells, um, who started the Stitch and Post a gazillion years ago. Valerie Wells is also a fabric designer and makes and designs some absolutely gorgeous fabrics. The last I've heard, Jean Wells is retired and Valerie is running the business. So, and the quilt basket has changed hands a couple of times since I've lived in Bend, but they always have beautiful things. And so, just between us, my agent, my dear agent, my literary agent, just had his first baby. And so I've been making a baby quilt, but keep it under your hat. And Max, if you're listening, you didn't hear that. So I hope I'll have something to show you next week. I got I've have all the squares done, but I haven't sewn them together yet. I gotta square up my squares and then get them all sewn together, put a border on. So I got a little bit of work to do, but I'm hopefully by next week and I'll get it out to have it quilted. So, but I also have a couple of Christmas projects I might be really interested in doing before the holidays. So stay tuned. And I would like to do more Quilt Along with Me projects. What else you got for me before we say goodnight? While Jen is double checking for last questions, I do want to say thank you for last week and all of your wonderful support. I read all of your comments and all of your emails, and I appreciate it more than you could know. Um, I'm not going to continue to talk about the internet and the creator drama. I've said my piece. I've spoken my truth. And for anybody who wasn't here last week, you can go back and listen to last week's live. Um, so the beat goes on. I had a great phone conversation earlier this week with Gigi. She's doing really well. I'm going to text her and touch base about how Grammy's doing as soon as we're done. And I appreciate no end the creators that I've gotten to know that are such wonderful, generous people. That's the way we need to be in the world. I always say when I was practicing law, I was the beneficiary of a lot of really generous lawyers who mentored me. And I have always tried to pass that on, whether it is in the law or whether it is here or in writing books. And so I think that's the way we need to be in the world. And I am hoping that things are going to simmer down and we're going to have the opportunity to get back to what's important, and that is justice for the victims um, and the rule of law and protecting the rights of others. Hi, Stacy. Oh, are you following the Mickey Stein's case? Do you believe they should have considered his mental health? I am following the Mickey Stein's case, and I don't think that it is too late for them to be considering his mental health. I think it's very clear that he has an insanity defense, and I think that it's very possible that it may be effective. Now, remember, when we talk about someone who is not competent to stand trial, typically what we're saying is they need to go away to the nervous hospital and they need to be restored to competency. That is a different piece than I was insane at the time that I committed the crime so much that I did not understand the difference between right and wrong. I did not understand. I was so compelled that I could not stop the compulsion. Now, we don't know what happened, but it does appear that Mickey Stein's was in some sort of psychological break at the time that he committed the crime, that there was some sort of psychotic break. And that he honestly believed that he was in danger. He believed that the officers who came to arrest him were going to kill him. He believed that his wife and his family were in danger. And, I do understand that it was a combination of things. First of all, he had this horrible scandal going on in the sheriff's office that his uh, deputy sheriff and reportedly or allegedly the judge were involved in a situation where they were trading sexual favors to women for being able to get out of jail and not having to wear an ankle monitor. And he had just recently gone through depositions about the case and about his supervision of this deputy, and what was going on with that. And you mix that all up with him being under a tremendous amount of pressure, with clearly a mental illness, and I think this is what we've got. So it's certainly not too late for them to raise the mental health defense. And everything I see, every indication is that they're going to. Apparently, he had been having mental health issues prior to the incident and continued to be delusional after he was arrested. And that is all sort of documented in the arrest files and in the jail files. So I don't know that it's going to be very difficult to make the case that he was not competent at the time. So it varies from state to state, but in a lot of states these days, guilty pleas don't mean that you are going, or I'm sorry, not guilty by reason of insanity pleas do not mean that you are going to walk out of the prison door scot-free. It generally means that you, in lieu of punishment, you are going to be committed for an extended period of time. So I don't think there's any risk that Mickey Steins is going to be released and go merrily on his way. I don't see that happening. But I do see a world where he could be found to have been incompetent at the time that the crime was committed, and could then have some sort of brand of guilty but insane plea. And like I say, it varies from state to state. Some states still allow the defense of not guilty by reason of insanity. But a lot of states have gone, as my home state, Oregon, has, to a guilty but insane verdict instead. So let me know if you want to hear more about that. Idaho and 4 other states have completely done away with the mental health defense. Although there is a sort of a loophole or a backdoor for that, in that if you can prove that the person was so mentally ill that they couldn't form the mental state, like intentionally or knowingly, then there is a way to bring that into court. And we saw that possibility in the Vallow case, and she wouldn't let her attorneys do it. But it was it was a possibility. Alder nose. Sorry, I have to get a little closer before I had cataract surgery and I have multifocal lenses, but there is this spot which is right about where the cans are on the shelf in the grocery store, where things aren't all that clear. So it's alder nose. I heard about a man in Idaho that is supposed to be unalive. They have said he's incompetent to have this done. Do they make someone better just to perform that procedure? Well, that is a really good question. And the answer to some extent can be yes. If you have someone who is decompensated the way that Lori Vallow was, and is at least temporarily unable to understand the reason for her execution, then yes, they could send that person to the nervous hospital and rehabilitate them, whether through chemical means, therapeutic means, until that person is restored to competency. This case, the case we talked about a little bit earlier, Ralph Menzies, it is a little bit different. The reason it's a little bit different is he's been on death row since 1988. On September 5th, he had a death warrant calling for him to be executed by firing squad. He was going to be the first person to be executed in Idaho under the revived firing squad law. However, he's quite elderly at this point, and his attorneys say that he has dementia. That is not something that he's going to be able to be restored from. And so his attorneys have wanted to have his sentence commuted, so he can die in prison, because they don't believe that he has the capacity to understand why he would be facing a firing squad, and that would be cruel and inhuman treatment under the Eighth Amendment. So that case, he had a September 5th execution date. They his defense attorneys appealed to the Utah Supreme Court. I'm sorry, Idaho. And the Idaho Supreme Court said, we want an additional evaluation. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. We want an additional evaluation. We want a current evaluation of his capacity. I think that if the Supreme Court believes that he is unable to comprehend why he might be executed, they will likely commute his sentence. That's what would happen in most any other state, because the U.S. Supreme Court has said it is cruel and unusual punishment to execute someone who does not have the capacity, for whatever reason, whether they are developmentally disabled, or whether they are a minor, or whether they are in advanced age and have dementia. It is cruel and unusual punishment to execute someone when they do not have the capacity to understand why they're being executed. And that's very settled federal law. So I suspect that if that evaluation comes back, now what happened in that case was that the trial court judge said, I've seen this guy. He's been in and out of my courtroom. I don't believe for a minute that he's incapacitated, and I'm not going to suspend the death warrant. They went to the parole board, asked for relief. The parole board denied it. So then they went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, hang on, we're going to stay his execution and pending another evaluation. So, I mean, if the evaluation comes back and says he understands the reason why he's being executed, then I don't think there's any impediment to him going in front of the firing squad. But that will have to be decided. And like I say, it's very different with Mickey Stein's, because he's not permanently incompetent. He has the possibility of being restored to competency and being able to stand trial. But as we've talked a lot about, there is a difference between I am currently not able to aid and assist my attorneys or understand the proceedings against me, so I am not able to go to trial. And there is a difference between that and, at the time that I committed the crime, I was legally insane and did not understand what I was doing. So those are two different tests that have to be made. So yes, I think Mickey Stein probably needs continued treatment, and he may very well currently be incompetent to stand trial. But the bigger question is going to be, was he incompetent at the time he walked into the judge's chambers and shot him? So these are all really good questions. We've had a great session tonight. So let me know. Hi, Sharon. I'm not a fan of the death penalty, but why did they wait so long to implement the death penalty? 1988? Well, this is not at all unusual. It is not unusual for a defendant to be on death row for 35 years while he exhausts all of his appeals. I don't think it's any secret. I don't like to get political, and I don't always talk about my own personal opinions, but I am no fan of the death penalty either. I think that it is incredibly expensive. I mean, they spent $4+ million getting the death penalty against Chad Daybell, and they'll spend another probably double that over the years of his appeals. And death penalty cases are always directly appealed to the Supreme Court. And then that's the first thing. And then from there are direct appeals, and there are habeas appeals, and there are a number of ways that the defense can attack the death penalty. I think it's very expensive. I have always been concerned that I think that it is unequally applied to men and women, and to white people and people of color. So there is one woman on death row in Idaho. She was found guilty of having burned down her house with her family inside. And she has been on death row, I think, since the 80s, maybe the 90s. So she's no closer to having her stuff, having her death warrant signed either. So, yeah. What other questions do you have for me? Thank you so much for your questions. Once again, thank you so much for your continued support. And thank you for being here with us tonight. Um, Let me know if there are cases that you would like me to cover. Drop a comment in the show notes, the comments below, or drop me an email and let me know if there are cases that you would like for me to cover that we haven't talked about. And I look forward to cover some of some cases that you might not otherwise know, like the Portland Five. So we're going to keep up with those, and you let me know. And please, tonight, send Gigi some good energy. And if you have a minute, drop her a DM or a message and let her know you're thinking about her and her Grammy tonight. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, Jennifer, for being the best moderator in the world. Thank you all for being here, and I will see you next week. Good night.